Hey guys, welcome back to Tennis 360, the podcast where we talk about all things tennis. My name is Anthony Hirsch.
And I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
Welcome back to the Tennis 360 podcast. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. We've got Shanghai. We've got a few women's tournaments that happened this week as well in Zhengzhou and also in Hong Kong. There have been a few different tournaments at play. In Shanghai, it was Hurkacz winning his second Masters, denying Rublev, who was also going for a second Masters. Absolute epic. Multiple match points saved, third set tiebreaker, 10-8 in the third set breaker. And it was a really fantastic, really tense match to watch. Both guys really wanted it. Did you get a chance to see that one? What did you think of that match?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm still struggling with the time difference in LA, but I did manage to watch the highlights and catch Gil Gross's post-match analysis. So I feel like I have a good grip on what happened. But ultimately, interested to get your thoughts on this, but I feel like the Hurkacz forehand has been renewed, has a new sense of excitement about it, and that's been on display throughout that tournament, and in particular was the difference maker in my opinion in that final versus the two of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that is that was a weapon that I was very concerned about with Hurkacz, that it was really going to break down under Rublev's immense power. So he really pulled through. His serving was almost impossible to kind of break this whole tournament, and that really came into play. And also, I think Hurkacz is like kind of fearlessness in big moments, big matches, finals is really kind of underrated. I think that he has this kind of like battler's kind of he's a great battler and competitor, one of the best on the tour, and I think that really helped him out to clutch out this kind of absolute tense, tight kind of match. And I think that was one of the biggest like kind of differences. I mean, Rublev was really having a hard time breaking the Hurkacz serve. And it came down to a third set breaker, but it was a great win for Hubie. He's now 7-1 in finals, which is a great stat for Hubie. The one that he lost was in a Masters final, and Hurkacz. I think a lot of people would be surprised that Hurkacz has now won 2 Masters. He's been in a Masters final each of the last 3 years. Like, these are stats that you only put to people like Tsitsipas, Medvedev, but Hurkacz really doing very well.
Yeah, it's been an interesting season for Hurkacz, especially, where we think about where he was this time last year. He was kind of in the same bucket as like a Khachanov in the sense of, big serve, big hitting from the baseline. Was expecting him to kind of kick on and really solidify a top 10 ranking. And the first half of the year didn't take shape for him in the way that he would have wanted to. And the forehand was looking almost worse than it ever has been. Some of the stats show that his ability to break serve has been worse than his stats were when he was outside of the top 50. So something going on with him this year. I'm not sure whether he was working on technique and changing things. And sometimes that, causes you to take a couple steps back before you can take steps forward. It wasn't really until the hard court swing starting in Canada that we started to see Hurkacz look like he was gaining some momentum, had some really close matches against Alcaraz. We then talked about him before the US Open as somebody coming up in the power rankings that we thought could really have a good run at the US Open. Then unfortunately he got sick, lost in the second or third round. And so again, the question marks kind of started coming up. And so for him to be amongst a very small group of names that does have 2 Masters titles, and as you say, has reached a Masters final at least once in each of the last 3 seasons, does show that he is a top 10 caliber player. And his serve is certainly something that can consistently cause huge problems. And so it's really all been about how can he figure out the forehand, which has been such a noticeable weakness, in order to really solidify his place in the top 10. And it's hard to know whether that's a permanent fix that he's made or whether he's just had a really good week. But it certainly looked like a changed shot for him and made all of the difference in that tiebreak in the end.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it did look a bit better. I mean, it's still not the tool that Rublev has, for example, but it
No.
is like it's it's definitely much improved, I think, and that's a great thing, I think, for Hubie going towards this kind of faster swing, where on the faster courts, I think a lot of people can really push Hurkacz. I mean, the last Masters I won was in Miami on the which is placed slower than Shanghai, so I felt like it was really good that, especially against a hard hitter like Rublev, his shots really weren't breaking down. He was holding his ground, and I don't know. I think his net play was a really good tool for him throughout the final as well. He has
Yeah.
great skills at the net, great hand skills, great volleys as well. And that was really good to see from Hurkacz coming in and using the kind of talent that he has moving forward and moving through the court. Because I don't think he's just a server. I think that was really good stuff from Hurkacz.
I agree. And I also think his backhand is an underrated weapon. I mean, we saw him hit a number of shots that were almost like Medvedev-esque in the way that it stayed so low over the net. And a guy being as tall as he is and able to move to the backhand as well as he can, I think, you know, it's clearly his strength from the ground, and he was really able to use that to his advantage. It's such a reliable shot for him, and I think it's one of the underrated backhands on the tour. And that was really on display this week too.
Yeah, I agree. I think the backhand is really very solid. I mean, I think he's one of the few players that might run around the forehand and hit a backhand because his backhand is really that strong of a shot. He can hit winners like off that shot. He hit a few crazy winners down the line off that shot this week and really used it. Was very strong. I felt like Rublev was probably kind of hurting himself in some ways during the match because I felt like he could hit it more to the Hurkacz forehand rather than the backhand, but that's also props to Hubie. But yes, I think that was something as well for sure. So, but yeah, it was a good final, and yeah, I think like I said, I think a lot of people will be surprised that Hurkacz now has more Masters titles than Del Potro, than Ferrer, than Dominic Thiem, who only has that one Indian Wells Masters, which is crazy. I mean, and Wawrinka as well. I mean, he has two Masters. That's not easy to do, and
No.
yeah, and I think a lot of people would be surprised by seeing the Hurkacz name, but I'm glad to see it because people underrate Hubie, I think, and I think that he deserves the props of getting those kind of results where the well, I don't know, his weapons really come on display. So I was happy to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, the Rublev question for me, I think tactically on some of those bigger points, he didn't play it quite right. He went back to his usual pattern of play, which is to pound the backhand. And, you know, traditionally a backhand usually is a player's weaker shot, but certainly not against Hubie. On match point, he really pounded the backhand, and that ultimately allowed Hurkacz to neutralize the point and kind of step into the court and force an error. But I think Rublev, this one will hurt for him. Obviously, he got over the hurdle of winning a Masters this year, but he's been having some good runs. He's in and amongst it. We know that he continues to come back and work hard and kind of really put his name up there. But this was a golden opportunity for him, so I'm sure he'll be ruining this one, and I think he'll have some things to review in terms of clutchness in big moments. Rublev is someone I watch on the court, and I just want to hug him and be like, bro, breathe. Like, you're getting so wound up, and his emotions eat him alive. And I think that has been a barrier for him in making, you know, having successful title runs, making deeper runs in the slams. It's just like the weight is so physically carried on his shoulders and you can see it. And I feel like that's something he needs to address and work on because, you know, ultimately skills wise, there's not much that separates these top players. It's really the mentality. And I felt like some of that was getting in the way for him this week.
I agree. I think that especially in that final, I mean, people are talking about Rublev's reaction after the last point where he was I mean, everybody could see it. He was just smacking himself with the racket and just completely almost like self-abuse. And it's not fun to watch, especially when it comes with such a nice guy. But
Yeah.
I mean, it shows how much he cares. It shows the passion that he has for the game and wanting to win. And yeah, I think that it does get in the way. He can get real negative on himself. I mean, even against Humbert in the quarterfinals, in the second set, he started just yelling at the box, even though he was up a set. He was at 2-2, I think, the second set, and then Humbert was getting some breakpoint chances, was having chances to go up, but Rublev was automatically just started yelling at himself, yelling at the box. I think he's very hard on himself, puts a lot of pressure on himself, and I think that is something that Rublev mentally needs to work on in order to win titles like this. And I would love to see him grow for himself and also for his career, because I think that would allow him to win more titles. And it's going to be hard for him to do that if he doesn't go over that hurdle, especially when he plays such tight finals like against Hurkacz in the final here.
Yeah,
totally.
It's easier said than done as something to work on, but when you look at the on-court character of some of the best players, that isn't something that we typically associate with their behavior. And it's so consistent from Rublev to see these types of outbursts. We also saw him have an outburst yelling at some sort of photographer who may or may not have moved during a point. He was super frustrated. And it's unusual because he's such a beloved guy. People from fans to media and press talk about how nice he is, how easy he is to work with. And then, as you say, the way he treats himself on the court is such the opposite of that. And it's not the type of mentality that we would associate with elite high level players that are continuing to win week in, week out. And it almost looks like from the outside that it takes away some of the joy for him. Like, geez, like, how do you keep coming back every week with this type of attitude or treating yourself in this way? Like, it's so negative. And who knows what motivates people, and everybody has their own routine, but it's certainly an unusual style. And from the outside, I would pick that as something that's hindering his ability to get things done in the big tense moments. You want to play with the most clarity and freedom as possible, and it doesn't look like he's able to do that at the moment.
And not exactly something you'd want to watch either. I mean, you don't want to see a player hit himself like that at the racket. It's very negative, and it's also like you want to go on court and just stop it. It's like it creates an atmosphere of I think it takes away from I mean, the most important thing is the Rublev part of it, but it does take away, I think, from the fan experience, just because you want to get in the way and stop that. You don't want to see a player like that hitting himself with the racket. But anyway, that's
to watch.
Well put. So it was a good win though for Hurkacz, and disappointment for Rublev, who loses his third Masters final. He had one title in Monte Carlo, lost his other three. But it was a crazy tournament in general. I mean, at the quarterfinals, Rublev was the only top 15 player in the quarterfinals. We had Dimitrov, Jarry, we had Humbert as well. We had Sebastian Korda in there. A lot of players below top 20 in the world. But listen, I mean, Ben Shelton as well. But I mean, these are players that have had really good seasons. Dimitrov, I think, is 31-18 on the season coming into Shanghai, which is very good. He just hasn't had the results to back it up. He keeps losing to the top guys throughout the whole year on all three surfaces. And then Jarry, who started off the season crazy, nearly beat Alcaraz, I believe, in Rio, and then won in the Chile Open, constantly coming back from a set down. This guy who's just been performing really well also did well against Alcaraz at Wimbledon, so he was doing well. And then also Hugo Humbert, who's a guy who's 25 years old, and nobody ever decides to talk about him, but he is very talented. And once he can mentally find a way to actually win these matches, he looks like he can play about as good as anybody on tour. I mean, at his best, he plays some crazy high-level tennis, big shots from both wings, and a lot of good all-court tennis as well. I mean, Humbert, the total package, just can't seem to win the matches, but he started to in Shanghai. So I mean, I was really interested by this tournament because I felt like it was a lot of players who have constantly been underperforming but playing crazy, and they finally started being able to go over the line, and I think that was really exciting. And especially, I mean, can we talk about Dimitrov, who has been struggling and gets a win over Carlos Alcaraz from down a set. He was serving for the first set, then he lost it, but then he still won the match 6-2, 6-4, or 6-4, 6-2, one or the other. So yeah, that was definitely the upset of the tournament, and I was excited to see Dimitrov hitting through the backhand and really playing confident tennis.
Yeah, it certainly was a very interesting tournament. I think it's also an interesting time of year to have a Masters where some of these top players are feeling their legs and also feeling their mentals in terms of, how much focus they can really bring to the court. And some of those bigger names did lose early, and it left an opportunity for some of the guys who have been knocking on the door, who have been on the fringes, but haven't been able to get past some of these top players at the bigger tournaments. And as tennis fans, it's refreshing to see a kind of different field and a different makeup towards the business end of these types of tournaments. So I was excited to see that. As you say, I think the Dimitrov Alcaraz result was more about Dimitrov playing really good tennis than it was about Alcaraz not playing well, in my opinion. I think Dimitrov has been having one of his best seasons in a long time this year, and is playing with a lot of freedom, with a lot of joy, and perhaps he has this sense of, I don't know how much longer I have left on the tour, and I'm just going to really, enjoy it and give it my all. And he certainly picked up on, I guess, some of the lack of mental focus that Alcaraz has been exhibiting at moments in this season post the Wimbledon title, where there's just been that edge that's lacking a little bit. And look, can't blame him. The guy is young. He's still figuring out how to sustain that level of physical and mental concentration over a season-long period and running deep at a lot of these tournaments. And he just couldn't quite maintain that in the match versus Dimitrov. So I think all credit to Dimitrov and how he played. And I also agree with you in terms of Humbert. He has had a tough go of making a comeback post-injury. He did talk about earlier this year his kind of mental pain he suffered with falling down the rankings and the kind of lack of self-belief that a tennis player can experience of like, can I get back up to the heights that I've been at before? And he really had a hard time, and those results just weren't coming consistently. And honestly, since the start of the hard court swing, his name's been popping up a little bit more often. He's been putting more decent runs together, getting a couple back-to-back wins, and kind of putting some good runs at tournaments together. And I think, as you say, he has an all-court game. He's a lefty. He moves really well. He has good net play. He hits big ground strokes. I mean, I would certainly peg him to be somebody that's going to be inside the top 20 next year, and someone that could, pick up a couple of titles. I'm not sure I would pick him just yet to get to, kind of a Masters level title, but I would expect him to certainly get his hands on a couple trophies next season with the runs that he's put together more recently. And then also a good run for the two Americans in Korda and Shelton. Korda's had a good couple of weeks, making a final in Astana, has had a good run here in Shanghai. And obviously Shelton took out Sinner in an epic 3-set match that was so much fun to watch. And I think is what's exciting me at the moment is those names are still young names, Humbert in there as well, Korda, Shelton, Sinner, all under the age of 25, and having some really good battles that are super exciting to watch and participate in as a fan. And so I think it's a really good sign for men's tennis and the future of kind of what we have to come post the Big Three era. So super exciting to be able to see that at a Masters tournament level.
Yeah. I agree. I think a lot of people don't follow tennis week in, week out. They might not even know the name Nicolas Jarry or Hugo Humbert, but I think people who follow tennis closely will be like, these are players who are really good players. They just can't really find the results that they need. So I think that is that's something that is exciting for a person who follows tennis week in, week out. Like I agree with you. The win with Shelton over Sinner was very exciting. I thought that his forehand was looking really good throughout the match, hitting big throughout that forehand, coming to net a lot. It was really good. Good stuff from Shelton. His serve is crazy. It's going to do really good on the faster courts. I'd watch out for him in Paris as well. Coming in with good momentum off the U.S. Open and Laver Cup and everything else. So it's that's something that I'd be excited by. So, It's been some good runs. And I also want to comment on the Alcaraz thing. I don't usually like the comparisons of Nadal to Alcaraz. I try to stray away from those comparisons, but I do want to make a comparison with him to Nadal in that Nadal and Alcaraz are both players that give 110%, probably more, as high as that can go. They give their all week in, week out, and that's when you do that every single week, every single title, every single point, every single match with such physical game styles. It's hard to maintain it over the whole course of a season, and I feel like, even though I don't want to use the words running out of gas, I do worry that Alcaraz, as he did seem to do last year, might be running out of gas towards the end of this season as well. He played even more matches coming into New York this year than he did last year by a pretty good margin, and I feel like even in New York, I felt like even though Medvedev played an absolutely remarkable performance, I felt even at times at the U.S. Open, I felt like he wasn't quite looking fully fresh or fully himself. So I do worry that Alcaraz might have an issue of running out of gas as like certain seasons come to a close. So that's something that I would agree with, that I do have a worry about fatigue with Alcaraz and with him wearing down. But we'll see how that kind of manifests and how that plays out in Paris, and then at the ATP finals with Djokovic there as well, and Sinner, and a lot of other great players.
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely a question mark. I know his coach has mentioned it too, in terms of talking about, like, do you really have to go full throttle on a 40 love point? Can we conserve some energy there? Can we be a little bit more considerate of the longevity of this season? And ultimately, I think it's a good quality that he has that mentality. I'd rather a player come to the court with that approach and try to dial it back than the other way around. I mean, he didn't play the Australian Open at the start of this year, and he then played a lot, did well-ish at the French Open, obviously won Wimbledon, and then has had an absolutely insane schedule since then. And I think he'll, he's still learning all of the surfaces. He's still early on in his experience level on the tour. And I think him and his team will work out, a system that allows him to perform at the highest level, at the bookend of the season consistently. But I would agree with you. I think he is a little bit more like that. We did often see Nadal peter out at the end of seasons, and it was tough for him to kind of overcome, I guess, the resilience of a Djokovic who never seems to lose his legs. And so, something for him to think about in terms of the longevity of his career. Certainly something he won't want to kind of have on an ongoing basis, but also at the same time recognizing that doesn't take credit away from Dimitrov. And players lose matches, and that happens, and it's not always about fatigue or he played too many tournaments. Sometimes the guy just played better tennis on the day, and we just have to accept that for what it is. The guy is not a robot, and he's going to lose matches. So you can't always read too much into things, because that's the love of the game. Things happen. So
yeah, and I mean, he's so young, so he has time to figure it out over the course of a career. Obviously the shout out to Grigor, and it's good that Alcaraz has challenges, because that's how you get to become the greatest of all time. No greatest of all time didn't get there without having a million challenges, and you can look at Djokovic to prove that point completely, because he had to go through honestly through hell and back, facing against the two greatest players that ever lived, aside from himself, to get to that point. So Alcaraz will need those challenges to grow and to get better. So but that was Shanghai. A lot of players doing well that you might not totally expect. It wasn't a Sinner, it wasn't an Alcaraz that, like I said, people who aren't huge fans of the sport following would be super excited by, but it's still what I think, for me as a tennis fan, I was excited to see some of the players who you don't always see at the ends of these events finally getting their kind of credit due. So that was good to see, and Hurkacz getting the win. And then we can move on to the women's events, where there was a 500 in Zhengzhou and a couple of 250s. First, I can start with one of the 250s in Hong Kong. Leylah Fernandez gets the title, beats Siniakova in the final. Siniakova, who's generally more doubles than singles inclined, but she can play well in singles as well. Occasionally has some good wins in singles. Very talented player. Obviously, her double success makes that quite clear. But yeah, Fernandez getting the win. It was her first WTA semifinal since March last year in Monterey, but it was really a really great performance. Took home the whole title, and she had to fight. I mean, she won a few 3-setters in this event, including the final, and yeah, it was good to see Fernandez finally performing. It didn't feel right that she was ranked outside the top 60 in the world. In this, I mean, these courts were playing a bit faster as well as some of the courts in China tend to play. But, I mean, Fernandez was hitting a lot of winners too and figuring it out. She beat some really good players. There are a lot of young players doing well in this tournament. She beat Linda Fruhvirtova in this on route. So anyway, it was a really good run from Leylah, and I think Leylah is somebody who is super likable, easy to root for, and very talented, great mentality on the court, great passion, great fighting spirit. And I think that once you have those kind of elements and ingredients, when you're making a player, they're going to end up having some version of success. Even if you say, oh, well, Fernandez doesn't have the game to beat a Rybakina or this or that, you can say whatever words you want. If they have the kind of crazy ingredients that Fernandez has in terms of her mentality, in terms of her fearlessness, her passion that she has to keep improving, to keep working hard, and also the kind of crafty talent that she brings to the game, they're gonna find some success. Well, depends. I'm not saying she's going to win majors. I'm not saying she's going to reach another U.S. Open final next year, but it was good to see her finally get another title.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I think it's been a tough couple of years for her since that US Open final. You know, I think she played with a little bit of scar tissue for the last 18 months following that loss. It can be hard when you break onto the scene, have that good of a run, exceed expectations, and then all of a sudden you're playing week in, week out against top players, and it's tough to back that up. And, you know, Raducanu has faced the same challenges. And so I think with Fernandez, you know, watching her earlier this year, again, there were some moments where I just wanted to give her a hug because she looked like she was about to cry on the court in some matches and just didn't look like she was having all that much fun. I mean, even making the French Open doubles final with Townsend and losing, and she was in absolute tears after that one as well. And it just looks like her mental game and her confidence took such a big hit. And also, you know, when you make a run like that to a big Grand Slam final and you're kind of an unknown player, some of that advantage is like, hey, there's not that much film on you and people haven't quite figured how to play you yet. And then all of a sudden, folks have plenty of film and they know what to do against you. And I think she struggled a little bit with kind of having a plan B and C to go to during matches. And although she has had, you know, kind of a great approach in terms of her tenacity and energy, I felt at times that had almost gotten her way because she was like getting so kind of worked up and was really struggling to kind of just do the problem solving and stay calm and kind of work her way through matches. So it was impressive to see that she did have a couple of these harder tests in this run here at this 250 in Hong Kong. She came through a couple 3-set matches where she did have to do that problem solving. She did have to figure some things out. I know she was also missing a couple members of her team in her box. And sometimes it is that way with players where you let them go on their own for a little bit and they can kind of figure some things out by themselves. And maybe that was a little bit what she needed this week, was just some time on court kind of without the coaching box in full presence and just kind of doing her own thing and doing the problem solving. So great to see her back and getting her third career title. And hopefully she can really use that as a confidence boost moving into 2024, because as you say, she certainly has the game and the skill set to push up and be a top 30 player, top 20 player, as she should be. She's also a talented doubles player. And so hopefully she can have a little bit more fun and just take a deep breath and release some of the tension that she seems to have been playing with.
Yeah, don't have much to add on there. I'd be excited to see Fernandez find her way back to kind of her best form. She was close to reaching the top 10 following kind of to the September following the U.S. Open, when her ranking was on at a high off of those finals points at the U.S. Open. So yeah, I'd be excited to see Fernandez back at her best, and hopefully that she can find whatever she had at that U.S. Open. And I would love to see her get back to that level because she showed that she can play that way, and I would love to see her do that again. I'm excited to see her on the clay next year as well, because I think that's a place where she can perform quite well as well. And then there's also a 250 in Seoul where Jessica Pegula took the title against Yuan. In the final, Yuan's a player outside the top 100. She also beat a player outside the top 100 in the semifinals, an American named Bektis. So that was a really good win for Pegula, who I feel like could use more kind of titles at the moment, build up her confidence, because she is one of the best players in the world, and has been. I mean, I think took home the title in took the title in Canada. I believe I'd like to say was it in Canada, and so it was a Pegula's been. It should be seen as one of the top 5 best players in the world, and it's good to see her getting some titles. And her mom is actually from Korea. After the match, she had a post-match interview as well, where she was mentioning as well and saying that she's been feeling a lot of love from a lot of fan support. So that's always good to see a meaningful win for Jessica Pegula, who doesn't hit as big as maybe Rybakina or Sabalenka, but all the same has just as much of a kind of effective game all the same. So it was good to see.
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
were your thoughts on
I mean,
Pegula?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's a super consistent player. Yes, she hasn't had the results at the slams that we would like to see a number 4 player in the world have, but she's a late bloomer. I mean, she's 27, and she's really only been a name that's been in contention the last 2-3 years. I mean, we last saw her in Seoul, Korea in 2019, and at that point she wasn't ranked anywhere near this inside the top 10. And so she talked about how every year she's kind of exceeding her own expectations, and she's somebody that has an all-court game. It might not be this flashy, showy game that a Sabalenka or Rybakina has, but that, it kind of reminds me of like a Radwanska type of player, somebody that's always gonna, cause problems, is super consistent from the baseline. She's willing to dig in and have long rallies, and kind of has honestly showed some really good mental resilience at the bigger stages of tournaments outside of the slams. And yeah, I mean, obviously, as you said, this one means a lot to her because her mom was adopted from Korea. When she won in Canada, she was like, I feel like I'm basically Canadian because she, lives on the Canada border in Buffalo, New York. And so she seems to kind of do well with a little bit of that like home crowd favorite type of atmosphere, as she should. And so nice to see her get a title going into the WTA finals. She certainly deserves to be in that top 5 spot with the consistency she's shown throughout the year. I mean, she stays physically fit as well. Not somebody that seems to pick up a lot of injuries with the way she plays. So I'm happy to see her pick up a title. She certainly deserves it.
Yeah, totally. I think Pegula's proven time. I mean, you also see somebody like it's very comparable to Rublev on the men's side. I mean, kind of in an obvious way, where they've reached a lot of major quarterfinals at this point across all the kind of surfaces. But that just not being able to convert that to semifinals, and you feel like if they converted to semifinals, they could even get to a final or maybe even a title, but it's just not seeming to happen. It's happening more at the Masters level than at the majors, which is it's always weird to see players perform better at the Masters than the majors. I mean, actually, Hurkacz on the men's side is a good example of that, because I think has only been past the 4th round of a major once, and now he's won 2 Masters. It's kind of weird to see that, but listen, tennis isn't all majors, and I think that what she's doing at even the 250 level, winning these titles, and then especially at the Masters level, proves that she deserves to be where she is. And she's constantly working hard, and she cares about rising up the ranks. I think she works so hard. She's going to figure out to get a way to get past that quarterfinal stage. I mean, she got super close at Wimbledon. You would think at grass that would actually be the hardest place for her to actually break through to a semifinal. So I think maybe not at Wimbledon, but at one of the majors, she's going to find a way to get to the semifinals again.
I think so too. She's a super intelligent person in general. If you guys are interested in getting to know her, she writes a column for the BBC Sports page, and it's always really insightful. And she gives kind of analytical reports on some of her own matches as well, where she kind of breaks down what she's going to be working on and where she thinks she could have made improvements. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, she lost in the final in Tokyo to Kudermetova, and she has really good, self-awareness. And I think the fact that she's having this success kind of later on in her career shows that she is someone that's kind of able to be, a little self-critical and put together a plan for herself to kind of figure it out. So I think sometimes when you see that level of kind of intelligence brought to the game, and ability to kind of figure things out on your own, not just from your coaching staff and outside input. So I would expect to see her break that barrier at some point over the next year or two, because I certainly think she, has the skill set to do that. It's just got to flip that mental switch in getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't have much to add. It was a great win. Great win for Jessica for sure, for Pegula, and excited to see her at the WTA finals. There isn't another 1,000 on the women's side on the WTA up until the WTA finals, unlike the ATP where there is Paris, but it'll be interesting to see her play at the WTA finals. And then the last one was a 500 in Zhengzhou, where it was Zheng who got the win. Chinese player Zheng, and she got the win. She beat Krejcikova in the final from down a set. It was a good comeback win, and also beat Sakkari in the round of 16. Did you have some thoughts on the Zheng win?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's been a little bit of a tough few weeks for Queen Wen, as she goes by her nickname. She lost her coach in Wim Fissett, who's reportedly going back to Naomi Osaka. She talked about how she kind of felt, very disrespected and let down by Wim, who she only just started working with prior to Wimbledon. They won their first WTA Tour title together earlier this year in Palermo. And I really thought that was a partnership that was a pretty exciting one. Wim Fissett has worked with a number of top players, who have won Grand Slams, not just Osaka, but Azarenka and other names in the mix as well. And when I saw that coaching announcement, I thought, that's the coaching upgrade that this girl needs to really push on in her career. She's super talented in terms of her fitness, her mentality. She has a wicked serve. I mean, she's up there with some of the biggest servers on the women's tour. She's still very young, great mover, and she hits with a lot of power. Just needed, a little bit of fine tuning and some elements of her game, I felt, in order for her to kind of really kick on and be inside the top 15. I mean, she's inside the top 20 now. And I think, she was the 2022 WTA Newcomer of the Year. And there were expectations for her this year to kind of push on. And so when Wim said he was leaving a few weeks ago, I was like, oh, geez, who's she going to work with now? And how's that going to impact the end of her season? Is she going to kind of take a hit mentally or not? And she hasn't. She picked up a medal at the Asian Games in singles, and now she's got a WTA 500 title, her second tour level title, and beating a former Grand Slam champion in Krejcikova, who's not an easy person to play against, especially when you're matching up a power game versus a finesse game. Krejcikova can handle all sorts of power and then, really come to the net, cause all sorts of difficulty with her slice and her approach game. And she's a very intelligent player. And so, and also Zheng playing with the pressure of wanting to win a home tournament. And so for Zheng to come through, and she hit 10 aces in the match, 30 winners. I mean, fantastic. And to come from a set down as well in a final shows that she's kind of got that mental resilience, and she's not letting this there's coaching change getting her way at the moment. It'll be interesting to see who she chooses to work with in 2024. And, ultimately it's just a good end to her season for her. Hopefully she'll find, kind of a new team and be able to push on. But fantastic win for her. I think really well deserved. And honestly, it's an exciting time for Chinese women's tennis. It's, I think, she's only the third Chinese player to win a title at a WTA 500 level or higher. There's been a lot of question marks over Chinese tennis in general, but we're seeing huge effort and investment from the Chinese government into tennis as a sport itself. It's becoming $1 billion industry within the country, when just a few years ago we didn't even have a men's Chinese player inside the top 100. Now we have 2. It's fantastic to see the sport growing in this region of the world, and we want to continue to see players come from all over. And we're so used to the Americans and the Europeans and the Australians, but it's worth noting that there's so much effort, within Asia and Africa to provide more opportunities for athletes to widen the game's reach, popularity, and ultimately deepen that talent pool. And she's the product of that at a young age already. So exciting to see that. And we just ultimately want to raise the level of competition in the game. So fantastic from their side of things to have that level of investment and see the results.
Yeah, and I really like the comments. I think that on the tennis is such a global sport. I mean, there's like you said, there's so many people invested in trying to get better resources to provide professional tennis tournaments in places like Asia and Africa, where there aren't as many. I mean, America, I think, has like 11 or 12 tournaments. That's not true for any other country. And it's there's in Europe as well. So that's really good. And yeah, as for, I agree. I think even on the men's side, Chinese tennis is really, I mean, there's a young player named Zheng, who I think is like 17, 18 years old. He's playing a really exciting tennis. And then Yibing Wu is, to me, one of the best, like one of the better talents on the tour. Just crazy, amazing pace out of nowhere. I saw him play Medvedev at the US Open last year. I was like, this guy is unreal. And then
Zheng as well. Yeah.
Yes, Zheng as well. Yeah. It's really picking up, and it's exciting. And Zhang on the women's side, and then Zhejian Zhang on the men's side. They were the first actually to qualify into the Paris Games next year, which the race has already kind of begun. But yeah, first kind of entries for China into the Olympic Games, which is fun to see. But yeah, it was a good win for. It was a good win for Zhang, who's a big kind of pace generator, a great athlete, and just all around just fireball of a player, exciting to watch, and just just hits crazy shots just out of nowhere, and just that's the kind of player that you want to watch, where they're just like all over the court, just hitting winners from everywhere. Like you said, 30 winners in the final is unbelievable against a player like Krejcikova, who's so solid, and it's exciting to see.
Yeah, and kind of on that point, not specifically for this tournament, but as you say, there are so many tournaments in the US. Yes, yet when we think about like tennis popularity in the US, it doesn't even feel like it's like the 4th most watched sport,
No.
And post the Agassi and Serena era, even more so, one worries about the reach of tennis in the US and kind of how it's going to get some of its popularity back. And, it's time for other countries to step up, and maybe it's a matter of passing the baton. And ultimately, we don't want tennis as a sport to, see its numbers go down or lose popularity. And so tapping into newer markets, newer audiences, expanding the reach to countries that maybe have a renewed sense of interest or a new sense of interest in the sport, I think is fitting given where tennis is in the US at the moment in terms of its popularity. So despite the fact that there are so many top players, American players at the moment, especially on the men's side, it's just not gathering the same level of popularity and attraction. So it's been great to see that, not just this tournament in Zhengzhou, but across the Asian swing over the last couple of weeks has been well attended and honestly very well run tournaments, and the players have talked about that. So I think testament again to the investment that they've made in the sport, and we can be thankful for that because we want to continue to see the sport grow and see more talent enter in.
Yeah, those are interesting points to be made. I think the biggest thing when it comes to tennis and our kind of thoughts on where it should grow, which kind of places and areas that it should go to, is obviously how we can best grow the sport in general. I mean, not just in one region or this or that, but in general, how best it can grow. Yeah, I think one of the reasons that US has so much of it is because we have a big, just like an absolutely gigantic market and money that can be, and resources that can be given to tennis. So I think that's one of the big reasons that it is so big. I think that it is quite popular in America. I just don't know if it's, I think, actually, I remember Gil Gross talking about it. I just don't think it can reach the likes of baseball or basketball. So that's kind of where I would kind of stand on. I don't know if it can reach that point because it's those sports are so culturally intertwined into what it is to be an American sports fan. I just don't know if it would be quite a reach to put tennis on that. I still think tennis is quite popular, but definitely the more we can grow globally, the better that it is for the sport as a whole to grow, because it has more legs to stand on. So I think that's something that we should definitely be looking at either way.
Yeah. Hard to go up against the money-making machines of the NBA and the NFL. I think tennis is never going to quite be able to compete with, both those leagues' financial capabilities, but also the franchises and the money behind those teams, and team sport versus individual sport. And that's extremely hard to compete with from an interest perspective. But I think, the onus on the USTA, I would love to see, a kind of renewed marketing campaign and more brands pushing into the tennis realm and doing a better job of keeping the conversation going and keeping some eyes on tennis in the US, not just around the US Open, but around some of these other tournaments as well, because they do a good job on local activations. But in terms of coverage on, your ESPNs or your major sports networks, it's just not something that we talk about enough. And I certainly think the talent and especially US talent is there for it to be a part of the conversation a little bit more. I just think in general, the ATP, WTA, and USTA specifically for the American players could do a little bit better with their marketing efforts, but that could be a whole new podcast in itself.
Yeah, and just quickly to kind of end off that point, I think I think that to have bigger kind of platforms like ESPN marketing more of the tennis games, or whether it be NBC or ABC, or that would be only good to grow the sport forward in the United States. So hopefully we can see that kind of thing happening and see the marketing be better, and not just kind of point to kind of, as good as I think drama is to sell tennis, I think there's other exciting parts of tennis that we can be marketing and exciting US players to point to. But anyway, like you said, that's a whole can of worms that we can open for another podcast, I think. All right. And now for the kind of power rankings segment of the podcast. So this is based off of Shanghai and also the other kind of women's tournaments that went on, the 250s and also the 500 event, which Zheng won over Krejcikova. And these are kind of these are the power rankings. Let's see what kind of the big differences are. Well, obviously, Zheng climbed up into both of our power rankings. I have her at 8. You have her at 10, but I feel like she has to climb up. She's been performing absolutely great since the grass swing. Very like the win percentage for her season before the grass swing to after the grass swing is very big disparity. So it's Zheng climbed into the power rankings, and then also I had Dimitrov climb in as well with a big win over Alcaraz. Then semifinals Shanghai, losing to Rublev in the semis. Rublev climbs up, but yeah, just a few changes, nothing huge on the men's side at the top, because listen, a lot of the players who did well in Shanghai, they're not going to get automatically right to the top of the power rankings, because they're not players who have been performing super amazing week in, week out, not getting to a lot of semifinals or finals, but a few changes here or there. If you want to touch upon some of the changes that you had in your power rankings as well.
Yeah. So I had a little bit more movement on the ATP side than I did on the WTA side. For folks wondering, I still don't have Djokovic in my list just because I haven't seen him play since the US Open. And I wanted to give a nod to a couple players who have been more active. I pushed Shelton up a little bit because I felt like he's performing well on the big stage. Again, kind of one of his first Asian swings of his career, and seems to be handling things really well post US Open. And he's such a threat on a hard court, especially a fast hard court, and I've just really been enjoying watching him play. So that's why he's moved up a couple spots for me, obviously adding Dimitrov to the list. And then I'm curious to ask you, because Zverev fell down a couple spots for me. He lost in the early rounds here in Shanghai, and then he also lost in the first round this week in Tokyo, which just started today. He lost to Jordan Thompson. And, I think a couple weeks ago, we were talking about Zverev being back, Zverev being inside the top 10. He's making a full recovery post that horrific injury. He picked up a title. He made a good run at the US Open. I mean, he seemed to really be like going a little nuts with his scheduling, maybe in an effort to try to qualify for the ATP finals. And I felt like I was concerned that he might start to lose or lack some energy as a result of all of the matches he's been playing and the long matches and the traveling. And I feel like that's what we're seeing now. But I still would pick him as somebody who is a name to watch out for at the Paris Masters. Maybe he's sort of had the entry list for Tokyo. I'm not sure what to think exactly, but it looks like you've lost him inside your top 10. So curious what you're feeling about him.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he deserved a nod to stay in, but my thoughts were that he did just lose first round to Jordan Thompson, which is not a good win for Zverev. I felt like last week he lost pretty comfortably to and even though he has been on even his loss to Medvedev, he wasn't looking as, I don't know, the kind of big game that he was looking like he was promising to bring, starting from around Cincinnati up to kind of the U.S. Open and a couple of events after that, winning also a title, I believe, in Zhuhai, or was it Kachanov in Zhuhai? One of those the titles that week. So he is playing a good ball. I'm kind of putting him out, expecting him to jump back in. So we'll see how he does over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, just because he's been losing early rounds, I decided to give a nod to some of these other players that performed well in Shanghai, but I mean, just as easily could have put him in. But yeah, I mean, that's a good question because he definitely is probably the fifth, sixth, at most seventh best player of the year, and he's playing a very good ball. So up until the last couple of weeks. But yeah, and then what else? I had Krejcikova jump into my top 10. I feel like she's finally playing a better ball, and I'm kind of putting her in with the kind of I don't know, promise of hoping that she just keeps improving upon that, because I know how well she can play at her best. So I felt like she deserved the nod to be in the top 10, because if I see her in the draw for the next few weeks, I'm like, okay, well, that's a player who I would not want to see on the other side. As my opponent. So
yeah, absolutely. She had a good run in San Diego, picked up a title there. I noticed she may have taken your spot for Jabeur, which would be fair. I think Jabeur again has had a little bit of a on again, off again season, and she pulled out of the WTA 500 in her quarterfinal match against Kazakina with a knee injury. It seems like it's the same knee that's kind of been niggling all season long.
I think it was actually I think it was actually the second round 16 match, I think
okay,
that's right.
Yeah. Either way, she kind of tried to pack her schedule a little bit to qualify for the WTA finals. Now that she has qualified, perhaps again there's things of how much do I want to push it. She definitely wants to play this home tournament in Tunisia. She's playing that wild card in doubles with Venus Williams, so maybe that was playing on her mind a little bit as well. But her form has been on again, off again, so I could see why you would give her a nod. Krejcikova a nod over Jabeur at the moment. I see you also dropped Garcia out of your top 10.
Yes, yeah, Garcia and Jabeur are two players that did drop out of mine. Yeah, Garcia could have gotten the nod. She lost early to Paolini, although I do like Paolini a lot. I mean, Garcia started performing well over the last 2 or 3 weeks, so that's kind of why I felt like a player like Krejcikova, I do want to give the nod because I feel like it's a bit similar to Garcia, but she was the one who did reach the final this week, so I just felt like that's kind of why I decided to bring her in. And then also Mukova, who's at 7, just hasn't played since the U.S. Open, but that's kind of just a difference of whatever. I just feel like she, the next time she plays, I'll be just as excited to see how she's going to do. But yeah, a few changes in the power rankings. I don't feel like anything absolutely massive or I think we have pretty much the same top 3. So just a few different changes in there. But and then we can jump to the kind of upcoming section of the podcast where we talk about tournaments coming up. There's a lot of stuff coming up. There are 3 events on the ATP side, which is pretty exciting. There's a couple of 250s and a 500 in Tokyo. At the Tokyo event, Fritz will be defending. Also, Casper Ruud is playing. Zverev is playing. Also, Demonor, Paul, with the race still on. People trying to get to the top 8 in the race, trying to take over spots. Zverev at 7th. Tsitsipas is at 6th. Rublev at 5th is going to be a hard call to get over, I think, but Rune at 8th might be pretty vulnerable. So, and Rune, Paul and Demonor, I feel like they're going to really like their chances as the end of the season kind of comes. Paul had a good win this week. I think he was down a set, and he still managed to win. So hopefully Paul can continue some of the hard court form that he's shown. But yeah, that's one of the tournaments. And then also in the other tournaments, there is a tournament where Tsitsipas is the top seed, and then the other Rune is the top seed. Try to see which were the ATP time. I'm trying to see where that is now. It's in Antwerp and Stockholm, so I believe. So Tsitsipas in Antwerp and Rune in Stockholm. And those are good draws for both of those players. I feel like in Stockholm there's a bunch of dangerous players at play, like Wawrinka, Manarino just won a title, Monfils is playing, so there's some good players. But listen, if Rune and Tsitsipas are on form, these are 2 tournaments that I expect them to win. But yeah, those are some tournaments coming up. And then also in Tokyo, that's the big one. Hurkacz is playing Tokyo. He's not even seeded. He's just won the 1,000 tournament in Shanghai. It just so happens. And it's a completely filled up with a couple of Americans, Paul Tiafoe, like I mentioned, playing, and then Demonor. So it should be interesting to see how these tournaments fill out. I always love the Tokyo tournament. So
yeah, look, it's becoming a very interesting business end of the ATP season. Things are not wrapped up, and the door is certainly still open for qualification for a number of names. And Tsitsipas and Rune are 2 players that have massively come off the boil in the second half of the season. And honestly, looking at the entry list, I have question marks over their ability to win these 2 tournaments in Antwerp and Stockholm. First, looking at Tsitsipas, I mean, he lost early rounds again in the Shanghai Masters. He hasn't gotten out of the 3rd round since Wimbledon, or even before then, of a tournament. I think he won a tournament post Wimbledon and then hasn't gotten out of the 3rd round since. He won one in South America, but since Los Cabos, Tsitsipas hasn't had any good results, hasn't gotten out of a 3rd round at a tournament. You can see the confidence is going, and our notes here show that he has a potential rematch against Stricker, who played well against him at the US Open, beat him in 5 sets. I mean, that's a name to watch out for in terms of kind of a dangerous all court game. And then with Rune, I mean, also has a coaching change. He's not working with the Moratoglu group anymore, or at least not specifically with Patrick anymore. He has had a nasty back injury. A disc bulge, in my opinion, is something that really is a 6-month injury. Some people might look at that and think it's, a 6-weeker, but those ones are really hard to recover from. They're often persistent, niggling injuries that you feel fine one day, you don't feel fine the next. And they're very debilitating in terms of your movement and your ability to really play with freedom. And the pain can be pretty severe. So I have some sympathy for him in the sense that I feel like the results are tied to that injury. But at the same time, when we look at the timeline of when that happened, I don't think he's out of the woods. And so for him to put together 4 or 5, good, solid back-to-back matches with an entry pool that, as you say, has names like Baez, Manarino, Monfils, and Wawrinka, I wouldn't pick him to win that tournament. And so to me, those 2 spots that Tsitsipas and Rune hold are very much up for grabs. And then you have strange momentum shifts in a Fritz losing to Schwartzman last week, and he has 500 points to defend in Tokyo. I'm not sure his momentum sets him up as somebody who we would pick as favorite to win that tournament, especially with the other names that are in the mix and the kind of pressure that's on the line here. I think last year Fritz was had a great, kind of end of the season and was able, without pressure, to put a couple good runs together and win this Tokyo title. Whereas now it's the other way around, with having to defend those points, knowing that you still have qualification to come. And I wouldn't pick him as a favorite there. He has a tough first round match against Cam Norrie. Cam Norrie is also a name that's fallen off in the second half of this season, strangely so. But again, is somebody that has the skill set to beat a Fritz early on. So super interesting to see, which of these names is going to be able to put a solid 2-3 weeks together here. And it really could come down to kind of the last few matches at Paris before we know how qualification gets wrapped up. So yeah, curious to see how this is all going to unfold.
Yeah, I'm very curious as well. Norrie is a weird first round. Norrie unseeded, so he could have faced off against anybody. Plays the first seed, Fritz. Fritz has performed well in Tokyo, not just last year, but also years prior to that. So Norrie really hasn't looked himself since that Indian Wells, I believe, quarterfinal where he played against Tiafoe. And just really wasn't looking like himself since that. He hasn't found any kind of form, even though he started the season strong, beat Alcaraz in the final, although Alcaraz was injured in that final, but started the season off strong. But since then, it's really not been there. Not been there for Cam, unfortunately. So I reckon Fritz will get through that. But even if he does, he has potentially Khachanov, who I'd be quite interested in the Khachanov Fritz quarterfinal. And then also Schwartzman is on that side. There's a lot of great players. I mean, Draper Demonor is a really interesting first round. There's a lot of players who are in the draw. And as for Rune and Tsitsipas, I would not necessarily bet on them at all. I can easily imagine it's a really high level performance from pretty much anybody in those draws, and then is not. I mean, they could beat Tsitsipas for with a really good performance. I just don't think that they have right now, and I just don't think they're in that right now where they're just like the top 10 players that they're listed to be, where they're just could be performing consistently week in, week out, and it's just not where they're at the moment. I think it's a good opportunity for both of them to prove themselves and to secure their spots in the race, particularly Rune, whose spawn is a little more fragile. But I still think that it's going to be tough for them to defend. I was a little bit more encouraged by Tsitsipas in Shanghai, to be honest, who came across a ridiculous Humbert, who has a good game to play against Tsitsipas. It was 7-5 in the third set. I felt like Tsitsipas played a little bit better, but it's not quite enough for me to bet on him in Antwerp. So we'll see. But yeah, there's some interesting players playing. It could be Team Tsitsipas in the quarterfinals of Antwerp if Team wins a few matches. Arthur Feast is a name in here. So should be some interesting players. Jan-Lennard Struff was playing really well up until he got injured just before Wimbledon. So we'll see what happens. But that's kind of the upcoming on the men's side. Yeah,
and then looking forward to the WTA and what's coming up. So things are a little bit more wrapped up from the WTA side. They fit their Masters right after the US Open. So A little bit of a different schedule than the ATP. We played our last 500 tournament last week. So now we've just got a couple 250s left, Romania, Tunisia, and one more in China. So don't expect to see the bigger names competing in these tournaments. Again, also there is a limit on the WTA side as to how many 250 tournaments these top 10 players can participate in throughout the year, which I think is a stupid rule, but is what it is. So most of them will be taking a break. The only name there that's an exception really is Jabeur, that's playing in her home tournament in Tunisia in doubles. I'm not even sure if she's going to end up playing singles. But a couple of the kind of, outside the top 10 names that are interesting. We've got Hadid Maya, who's had an on-again, off-again season, but nonetheless still a great player, a great battler. Wang is competing, Fernandez, Zhu, Lynette, those names will all be a part of the draw in China. Then we have Paolini, who had a good run in the previous tournament. I think she's a name to watch out for in 2024. She's a lot of fun to watch, high-level, high-energy player. We've got Frech, Mertens, Trevisan, and Monastir, who are also in Tunisia. And then a couple, again, kind of outside of the normal names we'd be used to, but Makarova, Minin, Parks, Wickmeyer, and then the bigger seed in Castella, who are all in that Transylvania Open in Romania. Castella, because she's obviously a Romanian player, so she would want to play her home tournament, and that'll kind of round up the season for the kind of top WTA players. So not too much to play for in this sense, apart from players maybe jousting for a top 20 finish or top 30 finish, or just, wanting to pick up a tour level title towards the end of the season when some of the bigger names might not be competing. So leaves the door open for some new names to have an opportunity. And yeah, it would be cool if Fernandez could back up a good week and have another, title this week, or if we could see somebody like Castella assert her dominance and get a title in her home country. So a couple interesting events to pay attention to, but ultimately compared to the ATP, it's not quite as exciting in terms of that end of year roundup before the finals.
Yeah, totally. I mean, these aren't the names that you would usually be seeing. Even play some of the 250s. I think a lot of players are resting up and taking this as a little bit of a rest period. Obviously, Hadid Maya is a name that can perform, is a player that can perform very well. Had a good run at the French Open, and she can win some good matches. Castella, like you said, Jabeur might be on, but yeah, these aren't really the names you'd be expecting. But yeah, there's some interesting stories anyway, and it's kind of what's going on. And there's a lot of play on the ATP side that. For anybody who wants like main tour matches from either side, that will be really interesting, with a lot of top players playing. Like I said, Hurkacz isn't even seated in Tokyo, which is crazy. And but yeah, on WTA side, a few 250s. So anytime tennis is going on, it's good to have. And yeah, and then we can go on to the culture segment, where we talk about different issues going on in tennis and stuff that we think is important to talk about. Ways to either maybe improve the sport or grow it, or just talk about things interesting going on week in, week out. But yeah, this week, a big conversation on the tennis balls that the players are using, which isn't really a conversation you want to be seeing have had. Like you don't want that to be a conversation. There's enough to focus on outside of the actual individual balls that players are using. But a lot of players are saying not only are they uncomfortable or impossible to control at times throughout tournaments throughout the whole year, but they're saying that they might even cause injuries. That a lot of the players who are injured, it might be because the balls. Pablo Carreño Busta, who came back this week, or I think last week, he was saying, you know what, this might be why I got injured, is because of these balls. He was out for 8 or 9 months. So that's a tough issue. What do you think about the balls kind of issue?
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting one, and it cropped up right at the very beginning of this year at the Australian Open, with question marks even from high-level players like Nadal over, what that the ball felt different from previous years, despite being a Dunlop ball as it had been for many years. And players bringing this up post-COVID in particular, and it being kind of a question mark. If anybody was playing tennis during COVID, it was nigh impossible to get your hands on new tennis balls. The supply chain for tennis balls was severely impacted for whatever reason. And if that's translated into how the balls are being manufactured at all, or the types of balls that we're playing with, but it's names like a Medvedev, but not just the big names, smaller names as well outside the top 100 who have been concerned by the fact that the balls are changing each week from tournament to tournament. And it's extremely difficult for the ATP, the WTA, the ITF to work together to try to have a standardized ball for each surface. And of course, that's down to the fact that each of these tournaments have their own relationships and marketing rights and branding rights with manufacturers. And it's kind of hard to, governance isn't set up in tennis in the way that they have the right to go to any of the slams or even any of the Masters or any tournament and mandate what type of ball they're going to use. And I think ultimately it's a question that the governing bodies are going to need to start listening to, because it'd be one thing if it was just one or two players who are complaining, but there's players across both the WTA, the ATP, and then across all levels, not just top players, but levels outside of the top 100. And it's not just complaints of like, oh, these balls are difficult to get used to. It's complaints about injuries. And that's super concerning, because ultimately our players are the product. And if your product is getting hurt because of the way that your governments are structured or organized, then there's serious question marks as to, how much work are they doing that's in favor of the players and taking care of them at the end of the day. So I thought Gil Gross's suggestion here was a very clever one. As many of you know, a player, for example, will use a racket that's branded a certain type of way, right? So it'll look like, I don't know, a Djokovic's racket looks like and is painted like a Head Speed Pro, but it is, in fact, not a Head Speed Pro. It's something different. So is there an opportunity for tennis governing bodies to work together and mandate, hey, these are the balls we use for hard court, grass, and clay? And then the tournaments themselves can brand or paint the balls whatever which way they like, so that they can continue to have the sponsorships and rights deals that they've had before, that perhaps they don't lose out on money or cause, branding headaches that happen with these types of changes. And can we do that in such a way so that, the average person watching tennis isn't going to know what type of ball it is? It's impossible to know from watching. It's only possible to know from playing. So I thought that was a very clever solution, and is probably the only solution at this point, because there's no way that there's going to be an agreed consensus as to, one brand having the rights across all of these tournaments. It's just not going to happen. But even then, logistically, that's a difficult outcome or result to come to, because whose ball is it going to be? What type of ball is it going to be? And we don't have one governing body for all of tennis. It's split up between ATP, WTA, and ITF. And so how could they even come together and have consensus on what this should be? Unfortunately, I don't see there being a satisfying outcome to this, at least not next year. It's going to take some time to work on it, but I very much hope that they take the question seriously and start to put their heads together and come up with a solution, because at the end of the day, you don't want your product getting injured over the types of tennis balls you're using. It's ridiculous.
Yes, that's totally true. I think, well, first of all, shout out to Gil Gross, another great guy. I mean, I'm sure everybody who watches QualityShot Tennis knows of Gil. Great commentator on across all platforms and on the YouTube, on YouTube. But yeah, that's a great suggestion. I think if the issue is for different kind of brands and that they want their specific ball to be listed on the balls, then yeah, it can just be kind of by name across the different tournaments. But yeah, I think another issue comes into play in which I've heard different players saying that they like different balls, and that means that maybe there can't just be one kind of agreed upon tennis ball throughout the whole season, which is another kind of issue that needs to be taken care of. So that's it's just almost impossible to know. The biggest thing that I would hope for is, like you said, that it's taken seriously, because at heart it could be seen as a pretty trivial issue. But if players like Daniil Medvedev are complaining throughout the whole Australian Open, run that the balls are ridiculous and are going to cause injuries, and that balls throughout these kind of tournaments are going to make players have to be out for 7-8 months like Carreno Busta has been this year. It's an issue that needs to be taken seriously, and we need to look at why certain balls are causing these injuries, if they're heavier, and how we can avoid that while also creating good matches in the meanwhile. So that's something that I think there needs to be a big weight on, is to how which balls will cause the least injuries and how to make that happen in the most kind of logistical kind of way, in the most realistic kind of way. And it should happen quickly, because I've been seeing more complaints about the balls this year than ever, and more complaints about the balls this week than ever. It's been so many players have been talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other caveat to it is that they go, from tournament to tournament, week to week, and they're playing with different balls each week. Like, there at least has to be a way to say, like, from tournament to tournament, if it's the US swing or the Asian swing or the Australian swing, like, at least try to use the same ball in each of those like swings, and try to get those tournaments in those locations to come to a consensus or an agreement, so that players aren't changing balls each week. Because I think that's probably what's most detrimental, is, going 1 week I'm playing with a heavy ball that fluffs up a lot, to the next week playing with a lighter ball. I think players could probably get used to it if at least, there's 3 to 4 tournaments back to back with one type of ball before they need to readjust again. And I think, it's something that, as you said, people might think it's a trivial issue, but at that most elite level, things like your balls and your strings can be the difference between winning or not winning a tournament. And it can also be the difference between getting injured and staying healthy season long. And as you said, there's never been more complaints than there have been at this year around the tennis ball. So that in itself should raise question marks over, are there changes in manufacturing? Like, what on earth is going on with that? Is the quality of the ball going down? And then can we do a little bit more research and digging into, okay, what are the balls that are most complained about, and what is it about them that players don't like? And can that be, I'm sure it won't be transparent to the public, but it almost seems like the players have no transparency there either. And that seems to be the case in general. If it's not transparent to the public, the players don't seem to know anything either, which in itself is an issue with tennis governance. And so, definitely a concern, and you just never want to see equipment being the reason why somebody, misses out on a season. And in competitive sports where your career could be pretty short at the end of the day, missing 7 or 8 months could, be the difference of millions of dollars, your ranking points, your life, and how you play the sport in itself. So they really do need to pay attention. And I think a lot of people will be paying attention as to what they're going to do about it, and if they are going to do anything about it. So we'll have to keep an eye on how that develops.
Yeah, very well said. I think I don't have anything to add to that. Just I hope that people keep paying attention to that kind of question, because the questions keep popping up, and the more that we can listen to the players, I think everybody is going to be happier. And it's not just one player talking about it. It's countless players every single week talking about it. So something needs, there should be, the tour should listen and try to figure out exactly how to stop that from being an issue, because that is not a something that you want to be a big factor, like you said, as to why certain matches happen a certain way, or why a player thinks that a certain match ended up going one way rather than another. That's not something that we want.
Yeah. And then also on the culture conversation, just yesterday, Kazakina released a couple statements, either from a press conference or on her socials, about the challenges of the tennis tour. And she's a name that, if you don't know, she has a really great YouTube channel. She likes to vlog. She shares a lot about her life. And she was basically just calling out how the organization, in particular the WTA, and the craziness of the tennis tour, and packing your bags every week, new beds every week, new countries every week, and just how exhausted she is, and equating that to a little bit of a lack of motivation and just kind of, I guess, love of the sport. And I think it's she's not alone in terms of players feeling that way. And of course, you know, you're paid to play professional tennis at a high level. And some people's answer is like, well, tough. If you don't want to do it, don't play tennis. But I do think that, you know, the game is only going to become more and more global. And it already is one of the most global sports with one of the craziest schedules. I can't think of any sport that has an equatable schedule and travels as much as they do. I mean, even think about Formula One, which is a sport that travels from country to country every week. They don't race every weekend. They get a summer break. They have, you know, just the scheduling makes a lot more sense. And even then, it's still crazy. And I think, you know, this is the direct outcome or result, in my opinion, of the WTA's scheduling post the US Open being absolutely absurd. I mean, again, we talked about it last week. You have a Masters in Mexico, then you're sending them all to China. Now they're coming back to Mexico. And it just makes no sense. And ultimately, it's not fair on the players. And as we said, even with the balls, the players are the product. And if the product can't show up and play their best tennis week in, week out, that's damaging for the sport. And it's not fun for the fans. And so I do think the tennis tour on both the WTA and ATP side need to do a better job of looking after the longevity of these players. I mean, players nowadays could play until they're nearly 40 years old. So do we have to pack every single week with these, you know, insane tournaments? Can we add more spacing between the slams? Like, what can we do to help people take care of themselves and ensure that the highest level of tennis is played whenever these tournaments are on? And yeah, I sympathize deeply with what she said, because I feel like if I was in that position, I would just be like, I just want to sleep in my bed and I want my mom to cook me some food. And like, that's it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think, I mean, in one case, on one side, on one hand, you could say that these are players that this is their job to play. This is the kind of challenges that come with such an incredible job to be able to play in front of so many fans week in, week out. But yeah, then the other side is that it's an absurd scheduling issue, and I don't know if we can have it like F1 where there's a giant break, although that works great for F1. But like you said, there's so many tournaments crammed back to back, so many parts of the schedule, especially WTA, which it seems like can quickly be improved upon with a few changes in the schedule. So hopefully that's looked upon. And like you said, she's not alone. I mean, Muguruza also this week was like, I don't have any plans on coming back to the sport. I don't have any. I'm taking a break, is what she said, and I think that's something we have to listen to. Also, Amanda Anisimova is another player, promising young player who just hasn't been playing. So, I mean, yeah, it's. You want the players to feel like they're like you said, it is a question of the balls. If the players are having some kind of what would you say, grievances, that's something the tours need to listen to and find a way to work around. And you can't always work around everything, but the tours ought to really try hard to fix this kind of scheduling issue so more players want to play. And I think it is worthy to note that even though it is an incredible job, it is a very tough job for the players to be away from their families at so many points. I remember Djokovic, after the amazing Cincinnati final against Alcaraz, said that he's sad a lot of the time because he can't be with his family. He has to be away from his family. He's always traveling. There's never a constant. The only constant is tennis and practicing. Very simple sport every day, every week. It seems like such a sport. So, mandatory events. So the more that we can listen to the hard to make it work best for the players, I think the better. So, and I think that it is to look at the scheduling more than anything. I mean, Kazakhstan is always a very genuine kind of person, and she'll say what's on her mind, and I'm glad that she did. And with any player, I'm glad that they're saying what's on their mind. We ought to listen to them, I think, a lot of the time, and try to figure out the best way to make it good for them.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, it's also like, these are comments coming from top players, right? Like players that can, you know, Djokovic can rent a very nice house near the US Open and have his family and they can stay there, or Kazuchina can travel with her girlfriend and her team and stay in a decent hotel. Like when, the conversation broadens to players even outside of the top 50, not even outside of the top 100, the financial difference is huge. And then you think about outside of the top 100, you probably can't afford to travel with a coach the whole time. You certainly can't afford to bring extra members of your family or support systems. And if you're a player that's not born in Europe or the US, where a number of the, tours go to for significant months, periods of the year where, oh, okay, we have the US tour. I'm going to be able to go and see some family. I'm going to have some time at home. I'm going to be able to sleep in my bed. Or, players in Europe where we have the French Open and Wimbledon, there's going to be an opportunity to go home there. You have players from Australia who from the French Open to now will not be able to go home because you can't make a quick stop to Australia and go home. And so I think it's trying to be mindful of the fact, again, that it's a global sport. You're trying to grow the sport in other countries like and continents like Africa and Asia. And so this question, again, is going to continue to rise over the fact that these are locations where players can't go home for long periods of time. And so, that takes a toll on their mental well-being. And ultimately, we know nowadays how much your mental well-being impacts your ability to play well as well. And so trying to find little breaks in schedule or means in which we're able to group tournaments more effectively in certain locations to allow for players to have time off and have time to go home, especially crafting a much more significant off season, in my opinion, would make a huge difference. If you knew like, hey, I'm really going to have a solid 3-4 months off here and I get that time at home throughout the year, that makes a huge difference. And so it's not just the comments from the top players, but I think it's also considering those who are ranked a little lower, who don't have the means to have a support system with them throughout the year as well.
Yeah, well said. I think we ought to just listen more to the players. I don't have anything else to kind of add on to that. So we can kind of finish off the podcast. Thank you guys for joining in for Tennis 360. I've been Anthony Hirsch.
And I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to QualityShot Tennis. We'll have more podcasts, more live streams coming your way. And I'll see you guys at the next one. See you guys later.
Bye, guys.